Welcome to Off Panel, Sketch.com's weekly podcast. This week's guest is a busy man. He's a freelance comic editor who works on Black Science, Southern Bastards, Deadly Class, Low, Drifter, and the upcoming The Goddamned and Tokyo Ghost. It's Sebastian Girner. Did I miss anything from your list of books?
No, not the ones that I fully edit. I work on a couple of other books in various capacities, but those are the books on which I'm working on as editor.
So, the reason why I want to bring you on is because first off, I don't think people really ever talk to editors in comics. And I was kind of curious as to just kind of like what your role is, like what editor's role, especially freelance editors like you work on a wide variety of books with a bunch of different creators and sometimes at different publishers. Like for you, what is your role as a comic editor in general?
Well, as a freelance editor, I guess I should start at the other end, but as a freelance editor, I kind of offer up a different kind of menu of services for creators that they might feel like they want to, incorporate into their creator-owned projects. Mm-hmm. Where a lot of, or everyone I work with has worked in the industry for, many years. They're all consummate professionals and creators, and a lot of them have, a lot of experience working with Marvel or DC or some other publishers. And there's certain tasks when you work for Marvel and DC that an editor, you just kind of get used to an editor being there.
Sure.
So be that just for story talks, script talks, talking about characters, just having a chat on the phone before you write a script, or having a chat on the phone after you turn in a script. Mm-hmm. On top of, those are all the kind of creative services you can provide as an editor, but there's also just stuff like scheduling, planning out, print dates, just nudging people, giving everyone a call, being like, hey, we're printing in a week. Let's get that recap page written. Let's get that, letters page set up. All these little things that, as busy creators, artists are working 9 to 5 or longer mostly all the time. Mm-hmm. They're going to forget about, I have to write, that letters page that one guy asked me about my process. Writers are going to forget about things. So you're kind of also the collective conscious, letting people know that stuff is due. So I guess that would be more like a general, managerial role, productions editor. So editors usually say that we wear a lot of hats, and you kind of have to swap them out. But those are all the hats that I kind of learned when you're an editor. When I was at Marvel, where I was for about 4 years, if you're an editor at one of the big two, and mostly about editors at the big two. I'm not too well versed on editors over at Dark Horse, or I know a little bit about Valiant, but it's probably mostly the same. Mm-hmm. If you're at a publisher, as an editor, you're kind of responsible for the characters under your purview, and your responsibility, is to the books, to the characters, and obviously, if you're in a position to hire talent, you want to get the best talent. You want to develop, the most intriguing stories, the most, whatever you want to say, whatever you think is best for this book, you push it forward. Mm-hmm. And that requires obviously a lot of planning. And depending on what exactly your situation is, so, usually you start as an assistant editor, which means that you're assisting a full editor on their books. So at that stage, you're kind of learning the ropes. You're reading scripts. You're learning how to identify problems, ask questions, offer solutions. You're also kind of getting your getting chops, kind of like making schedules, keeping those updated. Learning how to spin plates is another metaphor we use, just like the plate spinners. Just all of them, because the second you stop one spinning, they're all going to fall down. Yeah. And so when I was at Marvel for 4 years, and then after I left, there was a couple of artists that mostly actually writers. Jason Aaron, I worked with him on Punisher Max, and he and Ron Garney had just started talking about an Icon book called Men of Wrath, which we ended up doing, and he asked me to edit that, which was wonderful. James Asmus asked me to come on to edit a creator-owned book called The End Times of Ben and Bram, which She did an image, and just in the, I don't know, over the last couple of years, and then with Rick Remender called me up, and we had a pretty good rapport. We worked on Punisher together, Frankencastle, um, and he wanted to do Black Science, and I was like, that sounds great, sounds wonderful. Love Mateo.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple of weeks later, he called me up and was like, I got this guy called Wes Craig. Take a look at his work. I was like, this looks amazing. He's like, I think we're going to do something together. So very quickly, I got spun back into to a lot of work, and then I kind of had to start figuring out what a freelance editor does and how I can apply myself to that, because the the thing about a freelance editor is that the creators are hiring you.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're at Marvel or DC, there's never, like, I think that the traditional, from the outside, it looks like there's always an antagonistic relationship
Yeah.
creators, editors. And while that can be true, and it is very often, not always to the book's detriment, like very often a little bit of, headbanging can make a better comic.
It's tough love.
It is. I mean, also part of why some people enjoy working with editors and some don't. And again, some people need it, and also some don't.
Mm-hmm.
But I think any creative endeavor can benefit from a second set of eyes on it. And it just depends on the situation, where if the editor is just kind of swinging their, bludgeon around and cracking heads and doing what they want, that's an unsatisfying position to be in. But it can also be one where you can learn a lot, just in terms of, how do I deal with that? Mm-hmm. How do I deal with creative people or people in a position of power? How can I get my ideas across? How can I outsmart them? A very, very good skill to learn is how can you make someone believe that what you want to do is their idea, and then follow through with that. And you're like, oh yeah, you did it again, boss. Good job. But I guess as a freelance editor, it's just that I'm offering up my services for people who want them, and I'm also giving them an opportunity to kind of choose what they want. So, if people reach out to me and are like, I think I want an editor for something, I don't really know. I'm like, well, what stage are you at? Do you have a pitch? I can help you write a pitch. Are you planning out the first arc? I can do that. Do you just want someone to do a schedule? Do you just want me to call you and email you and basically annoy you? I can do that. That's perfectly within my means. Or do you want like the full pack? Do you want to just like put my number on speed dial and just call me, and we'll jam this out? So I'm kind of leaving it up to people, like a la carte. Is like, what do you think you need for your project right now? What do you want the most? And then we can talk it through. Because a lot of people don't, sometimes creators don't really know, or they're not 100% sure. Sometimes people come in, they're like, I'm 100% sure on the story, and I don't want you moving that at all. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I can step back from that.
Mm-hmm.
Every now and again, once I read it, I'll like, well, maybe this guy could, you can't help yourself.
Right.
But ideally, you're managing, you're delegating, you're kind of helping a writer, develop the idea from an idea to the script, to the page. And how to make sure that you're kind of, if you're coming at it from the way start, and a writer's telling you a story or their story, you want to make sure that they're telling it, that the writer's work says what the writer is intending it to say.
Right.
Which sounds weird, but it is all about communication. When you're writing something, anyone who's ever written or drawn, it has to. You have a very specific image in your head, and in the writing process, it comes down on paper. And sometimes, like, you don't even read your own work; you just send it off. You're like, I can't even deal with this, because the process of creating is so kind of taxing. And again, an editor is a I mean, again, it's my job title basically, but a lot of editing is done by boyfriends and girlfriends and wives and sisters and husbands, and just like, read this and tell me what you think.
Yeah.
Everyone has done that. The caveat of that is, of course, that people who love you and who live with you aren't something really just isn't working. They're probably, a lot of the time, they're just, I've done this myself. They're proud that you've done something. So I think in order to be a professional writer, you want to kind of get some experience in dealing with an editor who might not like everything that you write. Because ideally, if they're a good editor, if they're seeing something you're not good at, that means that they can identify what you are good at, and then they can enhance that, and they can poke you, and they can help form you as a writer. I'm saying this mostly as a writer because that's where I do kind of where I feel most confident, most capable is in script writing. A lot of the artists that I work with on the image books are 100% professional. And while I do check on layouts and pencils, there's very, very few, if ever, things that I need to really be doing there, because all these people are just like gunning it always at 100%. So
it kind of seems like for them, like almost. I mean, and maybe this isn't the case for every editor, but it seems like that your scheduling assistance would be definitely important for them, because I know that like when you're locked in like a room working like 12 hours a day drawing and everything like that, it's kind of hard to keep the big picture in perspective, I imagine.
Yeah, there's that. There's the just how people operate, because I get up really early and I work basically a normal day, longer mostly. I'm always on my phone, something like that. But especially for artists, artists have weird hours. Some people work, all nights and sleep all day, and some people don't work for 2 days and then just power through 48, 72-hour shifts. Like, there's no, and you have to let them, because you can't, like, not everyone benefits from a 9 to 5 or like a clear cut hour schedule, like 8-hour schedule with an hour lunch. Like, it's art. It's going to naturally not adhere to something that is incredibly quantifiable. So that's another task, is like, how can you help an artist maintain that kind of zen level of creativity, of I don't have to worry about a deadline, but you sort of have to worry about a deadline, because a deadline helps everyone get stuff done. But yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff comes with, you learn is like, well, how long is the arc? We've got 5 issues. Then you kind of work backwards from the on-sale date. If we have these on-sale dates, what are the print dates? Move backwards from that onto, here's when we should probably be done with this issue, move back from that. And all of a sudden you have a schedule. And then usually you're like already like super in the red, because there's something weird curse on comics. Like, no matter how much time you have, you always eat all of it up.
Yeah.
The last issue, if only the last issue is like a nail biter where like everyone stays up on a Friday until midnight, it's kind of a miracle. But yeah, the scheduling is definitely a big part of it, just because you're the person on the outside. You don't have deadlines for yourself, really. You're just reminding everyone of theirs. That's a job in itself, is kind of just always chasing people down and letting them know, here's how much you should be doing, here's how much should be done. But for the most part, I think having a semblance of a structure, or even just knowing that there's somewhere out there who's, trying to get you on the phone to be a little mad at you, can definitely help make comics come out.
I feel like I could use that person.
Yeah, it's I think anyone who works for themselves, any freelancer or any self-employed person, can definitely feel or understand how difficult it is when if yourself is the only person you're disappointing. That's not too bad. I can deal with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it also helps me, to have a lot of, in the sense that I have all these schedules to oversee, that gives my life structure and my life schedule. I've been doing this for 8 years, but I've only been doing it full-time freelance for the last year. Where after I left Marvel, I had a day job at a magazine, and then I would do a little bit of editing, during the day or my lunch break or after work. But yeah, like last August, I decided to, I had so much work all of a sudden and couldn't keep up 2 jobs basically. So I was like, oh, let's see if I can do full-time comics again, this time on my own terms. So, knock on wood, but that was definitely a learning curve this year, and having a lot of work, thankfully, helped me, kind of prove to myself, like, I can actually do this. I've never never when I was growing up thought that I would be self-employed, work from home comic book editor. Like, that's a very, very niche thing to aspire to.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things I was going to ask you about, is whether or not you're making enough to be able to live entirely off of your comic work. And it sounds like for you, everything's working fine, and that's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Knock on wood. A lot of it has to do kind of that I like created a specific kind of life that worked.
Mm-hmm.
Where what I said like last year, in August, I decided to go freelance full time. That was also the same time where I moved in. I decided to move in with my girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, and she had a dog. It's now our dog. So all of a sudden, there was like different. Um, I would stay home and I would watch the dog, which would, that saves us money because dog walkers in New York are very expensive.
And you're splitting rent.
And we're splitting rent. And me being home means kind of, I can do I can like, go shopping when there's not like a huge line in a supermarket or something like that. We do a lot of our own cooking and all that stuff. Like there's ways that you can, I mean, even just not commuting into work and not having a lunch in Manhattan every day. That was like my main source of income for the first 4 months was you spend so much money just getting to and from work and then
Mm-hmm.
also feeding yourself that when I got around to you have breakfast, you have 3 meals at home every day, you're saving 30, $40 that you
Yeah.
don't have to earn. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely, I'm in a really good spot right now. It took a little bit of, finagling to get to the point where I stopped worrying about it too much, and there's always going to be a month or two where you're like, oh, it's a freelance life, but you're always going to be hustling for work. And it's interesting for me to be in a position now that I used to like chide freelancers for when I was at Marvel, when I heard like, oh, you have an artist, and he's like, oh, I took like 4 cover gigs for this month, and I'm like, okay, that sounds good. But now I'm in a position where I'm like, I know exactly what happened that month. He had like, you know, rent was due, and birthdays are coming up, and wanted to stop eating rice and beans 4 times a week. So
Mm-hmm.
all is forgiven in the aftermath.
So, one question I'm curious about is, you're working on, in some capacity, 7 different books right now, or at least from the ones that I have on my list.
Mm-hmm.
How do you balance all that? Like, is your day is it just chaotic? Are you jumping from project to project? Or do you kind of like section things off yourself? Or, I mean, how do you work, I guess?
Um, I work. I don't like to get it too chaotic. I am a little. I think this is actually, if I have a superpower, it's that I'm slightly OCD. So I
It
have
works
a
to your
very.
advantage.
It does. It's my journey. I have. I derive a very slight form of pleasure from ordering things, from having them be nice and orderly.
Oh, that's a
So
perfect
on
characteristic.
it helps.
Yeah.
It can drive you a little crazy. I have a very big calendar on my desk that I draw on in dozens of different colors. So I have all my print dates, all my on sale dates, all my here's when script should be done dates. I have solicit dates. I have FOCs. I have initial orders. I have little notes based on who's going on vacation, when are Comic Cons. So right off the bat, I know the month that I'm dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's kind of like depending on what's the biggest fire. Like I have a book going to print next week and I don't have all the art in yet. So that's going to be a priority right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have a book the week after and the colors should be done for that. So let's check in on that. And you're basically just going down the line and being like, who haven't I checked on in a while?
Mm-hmm.
That person's probably needs a little bump.
Mm-hmm.
I have a bunch of calendars. Um, I have a pretty vast inbox that I kind of sort by project. And then I just start in the morning, try to get to inbox 0 by noon. And then
Mm-hmm.
take some time off, take a walk. By the time I get back, had some lunch, inbox back up. I also work with most of the people I work with are either, on the West Coast or somewhere in the middle. So I'll try to do most of the emailing and writing, reading in the morning, because in the afternoon I'll probably be on the phone, start calling people up, seeing how they're doing. And it doesn't get too chaotic unless there's a lot of books going to print. Because if it's print week, that's always going to be the priority.
Mm-hmm.
By whatever day, usually Wednesday, ideally earlier, those books have to be out. That means that the week before a print week, you're starting to put together we got to have scripts in, we got to have lettering drafts, we got to have the backup material, and this is all the stuff that in creator-owned comics and for the image books that I work on. All of that is up to you and the teams to fill. So you can fill the book cover to cover, or you cannot. There's definitely image will fill the pages up with either preview material of their own, or but a lot of as creator-owned comics, like this is your baby, so you're going to want to do a letters column, do little reach out or a little contest or something like that, and all that is just added content that you also have to generate. So yeah, I don't think it gets too chaotic, but it's definitely gotten to the point where where you're just burning the midnight oil and you don't get up from your desk and you don't eat.
So basically, your nightmare would be all of your books on one day being released.
I mean, again, this is still all like, I think the busiest week I've had as a freelancer was 4 books in a week.
Mm-hmm.
That was a lot. That was, I think, 2 of Rick's books and a Jason Aaron book and maybe Drifter.
Yeah.
So that was really busy. Not because the books were all in fine shape, but at the end of the day, it's like everyone's kind of trying to rush and get into a bottleneck.
Mm-hmm.
And
what's that plate spinning you're talking about?
Exactly. So, and it's at the end, like, even if you work in comics and you read scripts and you read layouts and you read arts and inks and colors, you see every piece of the comic come together. But it isn't until you actually get a lettered draft of the comic that you can actually do your real, like, is this a comic? Does this work?
Mm-hmm.
That's when you start doing the line edits, that when you start moving stuff around, like this caption doesn't work here, let's move that here. This guy, what he says here, the art doesn't really match up with his facial expression. All that stuff is, you're starting to fine tune it, and to have all of that come in kind of at the 11th hour, that can be really tricky.
Mm-hmm.
And so ideally, you don't have to do that across 4 books, in a couple of days and still make print,
right?
Because that print deadline is I hold that pretty dear. I think that moving books and bumping them around is it's something that you can do, and it's something that definitely creators like, I want the book to be perfect. I don't care how long it takes to get out, but I kind of naturally have to take the opposite side and be like, we should really get this out. Let's see what we can do to make this go, and that's something that's part of the job that you more or less kind of absorb when you work at a place like Marvel or DC.
Mm-hmm.
That is your job as an editor, is to make sure the books go out, and also part of the reasons that those companies are number one is that their books more or less ship on time. Because if at Marvel your book isn't done on time, get a penciler, get 5 inkers, and they'll make those 5 pages. We'll bring them out. Like, I've been there. I've been that butcher. But again, that's a different thing. Where with creator-owned comics, it's not, at the end of the day, you're helping creators make their comic, and ideally you're helping them in ways that they can't help themselves. But it's it's a lot of work. It's just just keeping the ball going, keeping the ball rolling.
Yeah. One thing I was curious about, your frequent partner in crime, Rick Remender,
Mm-hmm.
he in the back of, I think, all of his books said that he's spending the year focusing entirely on creator-owned work.
Mm-hmm.
And you yourself, you're, at least to my knowledge, unless you have secret jobs elsewhere, are working entirely on creator-owned comics as well. One thing I'm curious about is what do you think is driving that shift, both in a grander scale, and also for you personally? And I know we kind of talked about this earlier, but I guess I'm just curious, is from your very unique perspective, coming previously from Marvel and now working freelance, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that.
I think the last 2 or 3 years, maybe, or I could go back even further. I mean, 8 years ago when I started at Marvel as an assistant, one of the first books I assisted on was Rick Remender's Punisher,
Mm-hmm.
with Jerome Pena. And I think at the same time you had a pretty big influx of new writers, new artists, new talent.
Mm-hmm.
Jason Aaron came up around that time. I'm probably blanking on a bunch of others, but in that same vein, you had Jonathan Hickman. You had Matt Fraction was already there. Kelly Sue either was already there or came in soon after. Kind of a lot of the names that you see on creator-owned books. And I think it's just a natural cycle where creators come up at Marvel or DC. I mean, I just know more about Marvel. There's any number of
Sure.
writers, artists at DC as well. And at a certain point, as you gain traction, as you gain readership, as you get a following, and also as you gain um, kind of a grasp of your craft, and you one thing, say what you want about Marvel or DC, but those places do train you how to like work scripts, how to get story done
Mm-hmm.
on a time, on a budget. Like again, never probably from a creator standpoint, never ideal circumstances, but I couldn't do what I do without having gone through the boot camp, and
Yeah.
so there's that aspect to consider, and I think that there's always, I mean, every creator is going to have a desire to own something, to own the characters that you write, not just in the like meta sense, but like monetarily, like physically,
Mm-hmm.
And working for Marvel and DC is a great way to make a paycheck. But and again, as these creators kind of grew up and their lives, they have children. Once you have kids, everything changes. Like I've worked with artists and writers that the second they have kids, bam, they start acting mega pro
Mm-hmm.
because now it's not about you anymore. Now you got to make your little, your little fun comic book things. Got to start paying the rent.
Right.
And then, for whatever reason, people talk about this all the time. There was a situation now where both as an entertainment industry, there was a need for kind of a quick way to develop story, to take a look at, like, producers need to, I don't want to read the script. This comic looks great. Let's just turn that into a movie. Like, it's just
It's already been
facetious, but
storyboarded.
exactly. Like it's just it's a system designed to make profit, taking the shortest route to conceived profit.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, comics had a new way of potentially being monetized, and Image was and still is the primary gatekeeper. It's the ideally the straightest way to that kind of success. That granted, a lot of people work in comics, and success is hard to come by. It's just never been an industry that anyone has really gotten rich off of, except for a few very lucky ones or a few very crafty ones.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, you had this potential other market where now all of a sudden your comic wasn't just maybe I can make it to 6 or 7 trades and make enough money to pay my rent, but all of a sudden it was like, well, maybe this can I don't know, be a Netflix show, or maybe this could be a video game, or any number of things. I think it's just that not even that that's what people are out for specifically, but it's just an option. It's a new potential bubble of possibility in your future.
Yeah.
Whereas before, the roads, the way the road would split, maybe was pretty finite. Maybe there was 2 or 3, places you could go. Maybe the becoming an exclusive talent for one of the big 2 was as good as you could hope for. In terms of security, because that's what a lot of people want after a lifetime of making comics. A little bit of security can go a long way, and that's why a lot of people will always choose Marvel and DC, because again, say what you want, and no matter how readers or artists or writers or anyone feels, they can make it a little bit easier for you if if you're trying to feed a family and work on ahead.
Yeah.
But ideally now you can have a little bit of both, and a lot of creators are very savvy and very smart at doing that. You can have have a stint at Marvel, have a stint at DC, other Valiant, Aftershock. Now there's more little startups or companies are coming out of the woodwork, and the creator-owned thing, I think is the most exciting thing to happen to comics in a really, really long time.
Mm-hmm.
Hoping the trajectory continues in that direction.
I think it's interesting because, like, and I'm working on a piece about this, but I had talked to Eric Stevenson about this, or Image Comics publisher Eric Stevenson a little while back in an interview about it, and he said, as far as like why the shift's happening and like why it's kind of become the in game for a lot of creators. He pointed out that it's been really happening since like the 80s with like Frank Miller and like Howard Chaykin and stuff like that, or people like that. But I think one of the things, the bigger things, at least from my outsider perspective, it seems like it's a lot more I don't want to. I mean, it's not that it's still like a guaranteed like you're going to make money doing creator-owned comics, but it seems like, especially if you have had time to build up your name at Marvel or DC, it seems like you're a lot more likely to find some level of financial success with it than you were in the past. I don't know if that's necessarily like I may just be completely making that up, but to me it seems like, especially with like the relative levels in terms of like how many books you need to sell compared to like what you would need to sell at Marvel or DC to like make a fair amount of profit. It seems like it's a little bit more realistic to find financial success with that, and it seems to me that that would make a big difference.
Yes, I mean I think that was someone we're talking about. I think Kieran Gillen wrote an interesting bit about that a while ago, where someone was saying, "Oh, these books, don't sell much," and it's like, well, here's all the money you don't have to make if you own it yourself,
right?
Because you don't have a giant apparatus that everyone shaves off a portion of the. You don't have investors. You don't have a scheduled increase of revenue you need to deliver every year.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you can, guarantee for a certain number, just 8 or 9 years ago, the thought of a creator-owned comic breaking 30 or 40K was unheard of, and now that happens every now and again. Even 5K someone would have kissed your feet for that. Now you have a lot of mid-tier books, 10 to 15, maybe 20K. That's a respectable amount of comics to be selling. And the sales are always going to, attrition is always what it is, and it's always going to go up and down. But I don't think this is the way it's going to stay, but it's the way it's developed into being right now. And some people say that that's a bad thing because I don't know, mid-tier savvy. I mean, again, it's like no one also really understands the marketplace. Everyone has their theories, and I think every company has their, every marketing department will have their retailers that they talk to, and everyone talks to Diamond. And it's kind of like a whole big chess game. But I think as someone who's just, kind of on the bottom of or on the outside of that, trying to make a comic book, now's a pretty good time to give it a shot. It might not be at Image or at Marvel or DC, but in the same way that 8 years ago, Image was nowhere near the player that it is now, plus this another 8 years, you've got people who've had marvelous success on Kickstarter or have kept themselves going via Patreon. There's any number of ways that will also continue to develop. And I think where I kind of get hung up a little bit is that I find that most of it's also probably not true. Even the second I say it, someone's going to have a good way to contradict me. Is that a lot, like you said, a lot of the, it definitely helps to already have a bit of a name before you go to Image, where it's going to be harder in the future maybe for completely. And I mean, that there's like some writer or some artist out there, some kid who's going to draw circles around like some AAA talent, and they're just young and they're fucking raring to go and they want to do it. But it's gotten more difficult maybe because there is so much now, and there's so much quality comics. How do you get your foot in the door there?
Right. Yeah. I was just gonna say. I mean, you were talking about Wes Craig earlier, and like I had never read any of his work before Deadly Class, and I know that he had done some stuff for Marvel, I believe, and he was doing his whole Black Hand comics, all that stuff online. But like Deadly Class, that guy, I mean, he is my favorite artist right now. I love his stuff. He's unbelievable. And at the same time, like he kind of came out of nowhere for me, and that's cool. And I'm glad that he's finding success with Deadly Class. But and we were talking earlier before the podcast about like people like Kate Beaton and like Faith Erin Hicks, and they're finding ways to find success in comics kind of in their own way. And I think that for a lot of creators, having options like being able to tell your own stories in graphic novels, or like you could go completely rogue like Marcos Martin and Brian K. Vaughan did with Private Eye. Granted, that wouldn't necessarily work for everybody. Like if you were just some random person, it wouldn't be this. That model isn't something that fits everyone. But I mean, at least it is nice to have those options, and it is interesting to see how those options provide like new opportunities, both for, you know, visibility and getting and making money off of your comics, but also like visibility to potentially, you know, start working down that kind of funnel of sorts where maybe they work at Marvel and DC for a while after that. And then after that, maybe they, you know, go back to telling their own stories and have a bigger audience so they can start making like livable money off of it.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, you know, that's also something an editor, if they have time, keeping your eye out for new talent. That's something that, you know, an editor at Marvel or DC is in a much better position to do, because you're always going to have a book to fill, ideally, or you're always going to have a short, or you just want to try out someone new on covers. You can go out there and look for someone new, someone exciting, someone, you know, whose art people haven't seen yet. Something that, you know, and that's always, you always want something new. It's just natural. No matter how good an artist is, if you've read 50 issues of them, you're going to be like, oh, maybe someone else is good. That's also not totally true. There's some artists who'll just read everything forever, but that kind of thing, I do miss that a little bit. Just kind of looking, you know, maybe trying to find these little, you know, like, oh, I have an 8-pager. And those are always the most fun projects to work on, because no one in the office is going to break your balls over some 8-pager comics that you hire some new kid on, and it's going to be great, you know. You can have a lot of fun on those. Yeah, but I mean, we're very quickly talking about like the whole big picture, which is kind of how comic conversations go. You start small and end up with everything.
Well, so to get back to Marvel in your time there, you know, I as you said, like the roles of Marvel and DC editors are sometimes like sometimes it's like they're turned into supervillains. It's very strange. And I guess, like you said, sometimes like that might be how the role actually is. Not like there's supervillains; they're not like Cobra Commander or something like that. But
he'd be a terrible editor.
Yeah, he'd be awful. There'd be lots of snake sounds added in. It wouldn't make a lot of sense.
It's a very grating voice. You can't really talk to him on the phone for a long time.
Oh my god, that'd be hilarious. You know, one thing that I've always been curious about is, like, I know that a big thing for Marvel and DC is, you know, they're huge companies. They're brands. Their characters are their intellectual property, and they're like the lifeblood of those companies. And when you worked at Marvel, like, how important was the, like, I don't know if this is the best way to say it, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it, brand steward aspect of the job? And you may not be able to talk about that. I don't know.
No, I mean, if it was a minefield, I'd tread carefully. But honestly, I can't really. I always felt like the editorial staff was pretty small, considering how many books they were putting out, and there was some. Despite the fact that there's always chaos and you're always like running and screaming, and there's always going to be a boss, and there's always going to be someone who eats the dirt. There's a fair red line of camaraderie going through it, because you're all kind of in the same pit, and making really a lot of work with not a lot of resources. The big stuff, by the time, I mean, again, I was an assistant editor, and by the end I was editing a lot of books. But the really big stuff, I think, where those decisions are made, those kind of get hashed out in like big rooms where like the main writers are there.
Marvel retreats or whatever they call them.
Yeah, the Marvel retreats, the writers' retreats. Like, that's a lot of work that I think editors are glad to handle with the writers in the room, because very often the writers know way more about certain character aspects, or I mean, I've edited entire books with not knowing anywhere near the amount of, like, hardcore history of that character. That's not necessarily, and I would, definitely, anyone out there who thinks that I'm like, any editor is like some kind of Marvel guru, you definitely don't have to be that. Sometimes it actually can get in your way, because Marvel continuity is such a giant mess that if you're good luck to the editor of Cable who's trying to turn that character's continuity into any kind of relatable story. It's just a train wreck. So that also becomes where you kind of become the arbiter of taste. Where you're like, let's tell a Cable story, but maybe let's not go all the way into the details. And then immediately you're pissing off some super fan out there, like, oh, doesn't make any sense, time travel. But for me personally, I I have a hard time answering that question because I was also I wasn't a very good like continuity editor in that regard. I think even in the books that I've edited, I'm sure that any Marvel Handbook editor can point out a million mistakes. It just, I think continuity can help the story. I think that there's a reason people like these characters, and it will always come back to them. There's a proud and long and really, really interesting history. And I didn't really get into that until I worked at Marvel, when I started working with other editors and they started giving me, comics that they read that they were excited about. And a friend of mine, Jody LaHoop, was my roommate for a long time, who's the editor of Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force, also with Roma Pena,
Oh
which is
man,
a
I
great
love that.
comic.
Yeah,
It was a great. He edited the Strange Tales, which were these very fun anthologies. Some really great work in there. And he gave me some Wolverines and Daredevils. I never read Born Again. I never read that. And he was like, "Oh, you got to read this." I read it. I was like, "Holy shit!" And all of a sudden, we started talking about comics. And then all of a sudden, I like saw Daredevil in a different light, and I was like, "Well, if I ever got to edit Daredevil, then this all of a sudden would be a continuity point, or this would be a thing that I would insist we respect and maintain." But as for like the classic, like this, you can't. Galactus would never say this. I'm sure that's happened. That doesn't happen as often as I think people like. It's a fun fantasy to have.
Yeah, no, I love the idea that there's like rigorous conversations about what Galactus would or would not say.
Oh, I mean, you could have those.
Yeah, you totally could.
That the writer isn't. I mean, if I can't even make up something stupid. Like, what if Galactus came up and started talking like in some kind of hick accent? It's like, yeah, Galactus isn't gonna. Let's have him talk the way Galactus talks. But even that doesn't. You can just go back and see how Galactus talked back in the day. That's some outlandish, like Shakespearean stuff right there. I wish he'd talk like that. There are things I want to bring back that I'm sure writers would not let me bring back. So, I mean, joking aside, I think that ideally, even when those situations come up, it's in the context of a dialogue, of a conversation, where you have the time. And notice that I'm always talking about having the time to do something right, because comics, and especially editing, is very, very defined by its limitations, and that limitation is always time. But if you do have the time to call up a writer and be like, "Hey, look, let's talk about this line, let's talk about this beat," ideally, you're not in a situation where you have to be like, the judges have spoken. Yeah. No to Naked Wolverine or something.
I don't think anybody has ever said no to Naked Wolverine. I feel like I've read a lot of Naked Wolverine comics.
Oh, I don't know. I'm sure he could have been nakeder in all of those. I'm sure he was nakeder. Naked Wolverine is like a thing everyone... It's like this weird fetish. Like, everyone wants to see Logan nude all the time. And this is even before, like, the Hugh Jackman made him sexy. I'm talking about, like, runty...
5'3".
Like Danny DeVito Wolverine. That's a man I want to see naked.
There's Danny DeVito? Specifically as the Penguin?
No. Wow. Oof, just talked myself into a bad spot there. No, it was just... Yeah, Wolverine has definitely been more naked in comics that you've read where you were like, wow, he's really naked there. Bet you he was way more naked before you saw that.
Yeah, pre-crotch shadows.
Crotch shadows, all kinds of tricks.
Yeah. Well, one thing, like you were talking about how those 8-pagers were kind of fun, like the ones you would work on, like where you'd bring on new creators and everything. And it's funny because like when I was like younger, I was totally one of those guys who was like hardcore, like Summer's family, like tree was like tattooed onto my chest, and like I was talking about Cable and Strife as if they were like actual family members as opposed to clones or whatever exactly it was. I don't remember exactly what was going on.
I should have called you when I edited that book. Like,
oh man, if you needed
Strife, what is happening? No.
I can tell you all about Strife. 1990s X-Men, man, that was my stuff. But
called you up.
It was so once upon a time that was all what I was all about. But it was funny because like over the last like I stopped reading comics in I think around 2000, and I started reading comics about 2003 again. And then once I started again, I eased myself back in on like Vertigo stuff and like some Image stuff, and then I started reading some Marvel and DC stuff. But the weird thing was like it was like because of I think because of like things like Vertigo's influence and other things like that, I started being much more interested in just kind of like more self-contained stories. And so like in recent, like probably my favorite like Marvel comic over the last 10 years is Next Wave. And like I love that. That's why I'm a huge Warren Ellis fan already, but like that one was just right up my alley. But like some of the really random stuff, like I really liked this one Catherine Immonen and David LaFuente like Patsy Walker Hellcat comic.
Oh, Hellcat was great.
Yeah, that book. It was super random, and it was like a lot of it was about her shopping and stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know how close the continuity it was, but I didn't really care because it was just like her running around Alaska and doing like part of the 50 state initiative, and it was funny.
I think continuity is whatever you like. I don't know. I mean, this is a fun game you can play with continuity. Every time someone raises their hand, it's like, or the planet that has a beard and talks.
Ego?
Yeah, Ego. Like,
Ego's amazing.
How far down that continuity rabbit hole do you want to go? Because I'm telling you that every single character in the Marvel Universe is basically already ruined if you're like, hold them up, like, this is too silly for Iron Man.
Yeah.
This is too outlandish for Captain America. It's like, there's some people wrote some really weird Marvel stories in the 70s and 80s, and for all I know, they're also continuity. So, take your pick.
I think it's really funny that you're talking about how, like, at one point I think he was like the Angel of Death, and he had like ghost guns and stuff like that.
He did have ghost guns, yeah. I read that for like an issue, and I was like, ugh.
Yeah, like those comics exist, but for some reason, I remember when Frankencastle was coming out, people were like, "This is ridiculous." I'm like, "Really? Like, look at what else was happening with the Punisher."
Well, I know. I mean, I was there. I edited that book. Frankencastle, yeah. I mean, that was basically or at least for me, it was just finally. I was like, this is like a comic I wish I could have read. This is so much fun. It's like Tony Moore drawing Frankenstein. Gatling guns. He had a V8 engine on his back. I don't know if you know that. It's like very specifically a V8 engine, which is awesome.
That is awesome.
And yeah, I mean, I think that's a bit of a battle that's still being fought between how serious are your superhero comics and people who grew up with them. And I honestly don't know anyone like that. I don't know anyone who I can't have a conversation with and be like, this is really silly, but I still like it. And you can like that, and that's really silly, but I don't think you're any less of a human being. Like just having a normal conversation instead of being like, how dare Brian Michael Bendis do this to the Avengers? And you'll notice like everyone starts doing a voice, like what they think a person who cares about that sounds like. But
I think yours is pretty accurate, I'm going to be totally honest.
It's outrageous. 50 years of comics tradition down the toilet. I was just like, come on, it's just go read the old ones. I'll never have a satisfying ending to Berserk, which is like one of my favorite comics. I won't shut up about Berserk. Always talk about it. Artist hasn't drawn anything in like 5 years. Story's only halfway done. It's like shat the last 8 years down the toilet, just writing and drawing it into a crazy corner. Mm-hmm. I still love that comic to bits, and I will read it, and I will tout it, and I will tweet it. I just love it. But it's just I'm 100% satisfied with the idea that I'll never have it completely done, and I'll never have a satisfying ending. It's the same. I feel the same way about Game of Thrones. Like, I don't think that book's ever ending. No. And if it is, it's going to be a whole lot of hogwash and a whole lot of, let's have this guy over here come in with this thing that was another 8 chapters ago. And, the movie, the TV show might end satisfactorily. But I guess that's the thing, is that I can enjoy comics that are finite and contained and condensed, and those will always be my, mostly my favorite stories. But I also like sprawling, anarchic, insane, chaotic comics that make no sense, and sometimes a completely train of thought, whatever the writer or the artist was watching on TV that week and channeled through their, like, manga is very good at that because they go on for so long. But again, bringing it back to like mainstream monthly superhero comics, I think has broken out of its genre in the last couple of years because it's been infused with so many different genres. And I think that's what a lot of those voices that I did, those guys pine for, is just like, look, this should just be one thing, and that's the thing that we like it to be. Now, I don't think, while I can understand that train of thought, I can't really, there's no real hope. There's like, things always change. Things are always going to be changing. what you like now isn't gonna be around forever. What you like tomorrow might not be around yet. So I don't know. Just go back and read the old stuff. It's still good.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you know, I'm actually kind of with you. I don't really know anyone like those people. To be honest, I've only lived in the same town as like one person, like who was a friend of mine that actually read comics. So I've always been kind of up here in Alaska on an island, so to speak.
Yeah, you're
And
out there, man.
yeah, I'm way out there. Yeah, it's like the dog sleds haven't delivered other people who have who read comics, so I'm making my way by myself. But anyways, so I haven't really experienced those people. That doesn't mean that they don't exist, and it is very strange. But you know, have you, as somebody who's intimately involved with a lot of creator-owned stuff, have you seen that type of like kind of create like not creator ownership, but kind of like fan ownership of like something like Deadly Class? Like Marcus wouldn't act like that. That is ridiculous. He'd be nicer to Saya.
No, with creator-owned stuff, it's more targeted at the creators themselves. Interestingly enough, where
Yeah.
I think, but this is a pretty prevalent thing, as I think creators, especially writers, have become like so linked to the identity of a book.
Sure.
It's more like, I think sometimes readers don't understand that if a writer writes a character who says a thing, that's not the writer's opinion. He's channeling a concept through a character, be that negative or positive. So, I mean, for the most part, people who write into all of our letters columns are wonderful people, and they have, they really enjoy it, and they take the time out of their day to write an email, which is at this point like writing a letter was back in the day. At some point, they'll just write friendly Snapchats, I'm sure, but no, I mean, occasionally, there's people who are like, I don't like this, I don't see that, but they do, unless they, I mean, you can always tell the guys who like want to pick a fight from a mile away. It's just like one block of text, no punctuation, just immediately just like outraged about something. You're like, okay, let's see what you've got to say. But it's not anywhere near that, because they don't have a chance to know the characters. They don't have enough material to pretend to know the characters better than the writer.
Right.
There's only been one writer. If Deadly Class is around for 70 years, and Rick Remender decides to pass that baton on to Joey whoever, then yeah, maybe in 70 years someone will write into Deadly Class letters page in the year 2080 and be like, how dare you, Marcus would never ever. And valid. If that man has read 87 years of Deadly Class, he is 100% allowed his opinion. But for now, not so much. I think it's more when characters in the issues do or say or express opinions or what have you, that readers will write in. It's also a lot easier to write in now. You can just get on your cell phone, or just write a tweet. Tweet at Southern Bastards. Something. Actually, no one's done that, because you can't tweet at Southern Bastards.
Well, I know Drifter does the includes tweets from time to time in the letters column, and I'm like a big fan of letters columns. I don't know what it is about them, but they like quite often, like there'll be ones that are super entertaining, like sex criminals or well, pretty much anything with Chip is pretty entertaining. But I also really like Lazarus's one. Like it's got a ton of back matter. I don't know if you read Lazarus, but
yeah.
And like I really like how Southern Bastards, like they include, like there's been recipes, and like Deadly Class, like Rick gets really personal in there, and it's really interesting. It adds to the experience, and
yeah.
And I actually, not to be a total nerd about letters columns, but I it's funny how you start noticing like the same people writing in, and like there's like there's almost like continuity to them. I actually have an article I'm developing about one specific letter hack who has a tendency of following. He's like the villain of the Image Comics universe in my mind. Anyways,
I like this guy.
Yeah, you've probably received a letter from him before, I'm guessing. So you work on like making sure that those plates are spinning, but do you actually work directly on, like, are you the person who's like receiving the emails and sifting through and things like that?
Yeah, I collect. I mean, I have access to the. We all have every series, or every creator has this email, and I go in there and I a bunch of letters need a little bit of editing, a little bit of spell checking, and all that. I just basically get them ready, and then I put them in a doc, and I send them to the creators so that they can crack at the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes, sometimes for Rick's books, I jump in. Rick's too busy, or we just can't. We really want to have a letters page, but we just can't have Rick take time out to answer some. Sometimes you'll see me hacking it up in there, yakking it up. There was one guy at Marvel who I think read every comic Marvel published and wrote a review and sent it to the editor of that book.
Uh-huh.
That that dude.
That is epic.
Is a full-time job. He was like the Kaiser Soze of Marvel. I wish I could remember his name. Anyway, if that dude's listening, that shit is crazy, man. You could have written like 5 novels. You could be the next George R.R. Martin.
Wait, so did he he read all of them and then sent in an email that was a review of the entire series? Is that what he did?
Yeah. No, not the series, every issue. Like every issue. He would send it in and be like, this is great to read. Finally, la la la. And he was a huge fan of. He really enjoyed. He loved a lot of lady characters. He liked it when they were drawn strong. And I remember, and this is the reason I remember him is I edited New Mutants for a short period of time with Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning writing, and David Lopez. Was a penciler, and Alvaro Lopez, no relation there, was the inker. And the inker. And I remember this. He drew Danny Moonstar. I really love David Lopez. Their art together is really great. He do Danny Moonstar. She had these awesome. What's the muscle that's like on the opposite of your biceps? The triceps.
Oh, tricep,
right?
Yeah.
Oh, he drew this badass triceps. So all of a sudden, she looked like jacked. and I called him. He was like, "Oh yeah, I really like athletic women. I think I just naturally I draw that one line there. It's just this great triceps." I was like, "That looks great. She looks great." I was like, oh, she's a bow hunter. Like she draws that bowstring back.
Yeah, it makes sense.
You're gonna have some big arms, so this is great. That dude loved that shit. He was all about buff Danny Moonstar. So I like the fact that he did. Beyond having way too much time on his hand, he also had occasionally very good taste. So
that's awesome. I'm glad that he was a big fan of buff Danny Moonstar. Well, I was actually just going to say, I actually, we've kind of went. Not exactly the order I was expecting, but we kind of, it was starting with asking about editorial, and at the end I was going to ask you about buff Danny Moonstar. So
there you go.
We've kind of come full circle on what I was looking to do. But thanks so much for coming on, Sebastian. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was educational and entertaining.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel from Sketch.com. You can find this week's guest, Sebastian Girner, on Twitter at @sgirner. That's SGIRNER, and his work at a whole lot of image titles every month. Find more Sketched content on Sketch.com. That's SKTCHD, and follow us on Twitter at @SketchedComic and on Facebook at /Sketched. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.